off the coast of Norfolk, Virginia, 04:12 a.m., July the 14th, 1944. The deck trembled with each pulse of the engine. Salt hung heavy in the air. The wind carried the smell of machine oil, damp wood, and the hollow, exhausted bodies of the 300 German women prisoners packed into the midship hold, women who had not eaten for 6 days since being captured and transferred onto the vessel. They stood pressed together like shadows, their faded Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht coats clinging to gaunt frames, hair whipped into tangles by the sea wind, eyes sunken with fatigue and hunger. No one spoke. The only sounds were the rattle of chains and the relentless crash of waves against steel. Among them, Helene Muller, 23 years old, a former Luftwaffe nurse, gripped the freezing metal railing. Her skin had turned pale under the flickering deck lamps. She stared toward the strip of violet light where the sun would soon rise. Half hope, half terror. Years of German propaganda echoed in her mind like a voice she could not silence. Americans are savages. Women will be violated. They starve prisoners to death. Trust nothing on American soil. Then the ship's horn cut through her thoughts, sharp, long, and warning of something about to happen. Helene Muller was born in a small valley near Augsburg, where the Bavarian summer fields stretched wide with wild daisies. Her childhood was a quiet one. Church bells drifting over the hills, her mother's apple pies cooling on the windowsill, and the rough but gentle hands of her father, a World War I veteran who avoided speaking of war at all costs. As Helena grew older, the air in Germany thickened with parades, red flags, and loudspeakers. She didn't truly believe in any of it, but she learned how to stay silent. That silence shattered when her older brother, the one who used to carry her on his back through barley fields, was killed on the Eastern Front. The death notice came in a wrinkled envelope, written in cold, empty sentences. Her mother cried without making a sound. Her father locked himself in his room for 3 days. Helena decided to become a Luftwaffe nurse not out of loyalty to the Nazi cause, but to save others from the kind of pain her family had just endured. In the Hamburg infirmary, she saw pilots even younger than her brother, bodies torn apart, burned, trembling as they called out for their mothers. The lines between right and wrong blurred until they almost disappeared. Then one night, Allied bombs fell on Hamburg. The infirmary shook as though it would split in two. Helena was thrown to the floor, a shard of glass slicing across her arm. In the darkness, the groans of the wounded blended with the crackling flames. And as the sky burned red like a forge, Helena understood. No one in this war would leave with a whole heart. When the infirmary was evacuated, the nurses boarded trucks bound for the harbor. There, their ship was intercepted by an American patrol. No one resisted. Helena looked up at the dull gray North Sea sky and wondered, "So, this is how I become a prisoner. Just like this?" From the moment she was led onto the ship, fear became a constant scent, sharp, metallic, like the smell of a storm about to break. Helena didn't eat. She couldn't. All the propaganda she had been fed echoed through her mind. Women, prisoners abused, humiliated, starved to death. 6 days passed, and she survived only on water, sometimes licking the salt that gathered on her hand. Her stomach tightened like a fist squeezing from the inside. One night, while everyone tried to sleep through the relentless drone of the engines, Helena thought of her mother. She remembered the way her mother's hand brushed her cheek whenever she was sick. She remembered the words her mother always whispered into her ear. "There are good people everywhere. Don't let your heart harden." Helena wanted to believe it. But whenever she imagined America, the place Germany had painted as a pit of cruelty. She shuddered. Helena tightened her fingers around the piece of black bread that had hardened after 6 days, now no bigger than half a finger, so dry it could have been used as a whetstone. Her hand trembled slightly, not because the sea wind was cutting into her skin, but because of hunger and the fear of whatever waited for them on the unseen shore. A prisoner beside her, lips cracked and bleeding, whispered, Are we going to survive this?" Helena didn't answer. She didn't know either. On the upper deck, 3 American guards walked their patrol. No shouting, no guns pointed at them. Just quiet steps. Calm, almost unnervingly so. The yellow deck lights glowed against their steel helmets, making them look both foreign and nothing like the monsters propaganda had painted. In the distance, America emerged, a faint dark silhouette behind a curtain of fog. 300 German women held their breath. Helena did too. Because the moment they set foot on that land would decide whether the propaganda that had fed their fear for 4 long years was truth or lies. She gripped the railing once more. A strong wave struck the hull, tilting the ship gently. A bead of sea mist gathered on her eyelash, slipped down her cheek, and left behind a salty taste, different from the salt of tears she had not dared to cry for 6 days. Helena's hand trembled slightly, not from the wind, from hunger, and from fear of whatever waited beyond the distant horizon. A female prisoner beside her whispered in a hoarse, cracked voice, "Helena, what will they do to us?" Helena didn't answer. She only breathed in, the smell of machine oil filling her lungs and making her dizzy. She forced her mind to cling to images of home, Bavarian pine forests in autumn, church bells, her mother's embrace, but that past now felt farther away than America itself. Up on the upper deck, the silhouettes of a few American guards walked slowly. No shouting, no pushing, just patrolling. But to the women prisoners, that silence was more frightening than any command barked in German. The ship cut through the water, inching closer to shore. The rising sun began to cast a golden glow across the hull, shimmering on the dried salt clinging to metal. Helena narrowed her eyes. She realized she was hoping for something not too cruel, hoping for food, even a single bite, hoping to be treated as something other than the horrors she had been told for years. But she quickly crushed the thought. No, Americans aren't like that. They won't be kind. She inhaled sharply, fingers tightening around the rock-hard piece of black bread in her coat pocket. The ship continued toward American soil. A land they had been taught was hell itself. But Helena did not know that within just a few hours, everything she believed would begin to crack, starting from the smallest things. And Helena felt her heart tighten. The truth waited ahead, and it would look nothing like what they had been taught. The morning on the far side of the ocean opened with a strange kind of light Helena had never seen before, softer than the sun over the North Sea, yet bright in a cold way, as if it were shining straight into the fears of the 300 women who had spent 6 starving days aboard the ship. As the pier slowly came into focus through the thin mist, the first sounds of America rushed in. Seagulls screeching overhead, cables clanking against steel posts, and the steady footsteps of American soldiers on the wooden dock. Helena stood pressed against the cluster of female prisoners, her eyes barely blinking for fear she might miss something dangerous. In her mind, old propaganda lingered like a scar that refused to fade. Americans were cruel, especially to women. They would be dragged off violently, shoved, stripped of every last shred of dignity. But what was happening before her eyes was the exact opposite. American military police stood in a straight line along the pier. Their faces were calm. No loud laughter, no barking commands, no sneers. One man in a steel helmet lifted his hand slightly, motioning for the prisoners to disembark. His voice wasn't loud but clear, carrying a warm undertone. Please watch your step. None of the 300 women understood enough English to grasp the full meaning, but the tone alone carried no threat, and that alone stunned them. Helena was the 13th woman to step onto the wooden plank bridge between ship and shore. Her foot touched American soil for the first time. It didn't feel like stepping into enemy territory. It felt like stepping into a void where everything was uncertain enough to steal her breath. She glanced at a young American soldier nearby. He simply nodded. No contempt, no hatred. A brief moment, but enough to knock her heartbeat off its rhythm. No, none of this was anything like what they had been told. They were led into a large warehouse for medical inspection. The room smelled of dry timber and disinfectant. Helena stepped inside, her chest tightening. She had heard too many stories of American inspections. Horrors so vile no one believed you could live through them. But when she looked up, the person standing before her was only a young American nurse with neat brown hair, a face full of freckles, and eyes so gentle Helena couldn't comprehend them. The nurse motioned for her to sit. Her hand didn't tremble, wasn't cold, and carried no malice. Helena braced for hair-pulling, for slaps, for shouting. Instead, she heard a soft voice. "You're exhausted. Let me check your pulse." Helena didn't know the word pulse, but when the nurse's warm thumb pressed against her wrist, she understood. Care. Something she never imagined she would be offered. She swallowed hard. The feeling frightened her more than the bombs in Hamburg ever had. The nurse opened a small brown packet and tore it. A sweet scent drifted through the air. American crackers, a food Helena had only heard soldiers whisper about in the infirmary as if it were heaven sent. The nurse placed the cracker into her hand and gently nudged it forward. "Eat." Helena jerked back almost instantly. The thought of poison flashed through her mind like lightning. Years of propaganda did not disappear easily. She wanted to shake her head, but her stomach twisted violently. 6 days without food had left her nearly a skeleton. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. The cracker, buttery and golden, lay in her cold palm. She looked into the nurse's eyes. No deceit, only compassion. But years of fear had made her someone who could trust no one. She slowly set the cracker back on the table. The nurse didn't get angry. She simply nodded, understandingly. That understanding tightened Helena's throat more than hunger ever had. They were led out to the loading area, where military trucks waited. The back doors were open, revealing long wooden benches on either side. Helena expected to be shoved up like livestock heading to slaughter, but the soldier standing on the truck only extended his arm and said, "Ladies, come on up." Ladies. The word struck Helena like a misplaced bell ringing in the middle of war. She climbed up, but when an older prisoner behind her stumbled, nearly falling, a young American soldier jumped down and caught the woman with both hands. He lifted her into the truck as if she were his own relative. Helena watched, and her heart clenched. Wrong. It couldn't be right. Propaganda was never wrong. Was it? So why was everything here the opposite? She sat on the long wooden bench beside a tiny window frame with no glass. The wind carried the thick salt scent of the sea. The truck rumbled to life, shaking, and slowly pulled away from the dock. The road stretched southward, cutting through fields and small towns. Americans stood along the street watching the trucks pass. Helena braced for hatred, but what she saw instead pierced her chest. A mother holding a toddler, pointing so the child could see the convoy, her face unclouded by anger. Boys on bicycles pedaled beside the truck for a moment before falling behind, their mouths open with curiosity. An old man stood on his porch, hand shielding his eyes from the sun, shaking his head with sympathy, as though watching a herd of lost, weary animals. Sympathy. No one looked at them like monsters, no one threw stones, no one shouted curses. Helena felt a pit open inside her chest, a mixture of relief, pain, and confusion so sharp it nearly took her breath. If everything she believed was wrong, then what was her life built on? The truck rolled on. Dirt roads turned into paved ones. Low trees blurred past the window like streaks of green shadow. Helena leaned her head against the truck wall, listening as prisoners behind her whispered, "Why are they so kind to us?" No one had an answer. When the truck finally stopped, the sun hung high, casting long shadows over the vast Texas plain. Helena stepped down and froze. Before her was not hell, not the brutal camp described in terrifying propaganda sessions back in Germany. The camp before her was a row of light-colored wooden buildings, clean tin roofs, ventilated windows, and low cypress trees rustling in the warm breeze. There was an old baseball field with faint chalk lines, benches under patches of shade. The barbed wire wasn't twisted into vicious snarls, only a neat, simple boundary with no smell of death. A guard opened the gate. He didn't yell. He didn't point his gun. He simply smiled and nodded. "Welcome, ladies." Helena's body trembled, not from fear, but because that greeting collapsed the wall inside her, the wall war had built for 4 long years. She inhaled. The Texas heat was warm, but not cruel. There was no shouting, no humiliation, nothing resembling what she had been taught to hate. 300 women stood frozen as if spellbound. A few broke into tears. One collapsed, not from hunger, but from shock. Helena looked around, at the buildings, the faces, the trees, the clean paths, the soldiers without hatred. America before her eyes looked nothing, like the vicious caricature painted into her mind since she was a child. She closed her eyes. Her mother's voice rose from a distant memory. There are good people everywhere. When Helena opened her eyes again, she knew she had crossed a line she could never step back over. This was not the America they had been taught to hate. The first afternoon in camp, the Texas heat clung to the skin. It wasn't the flesh-cutting cold of the North Sea, nor the damp wind of post-bombing Hamburg. It was thick heat, carrying the smell of dry earth, sunburned grass, and faint traces of cow manure from distant fields. Helena stood under the shade of a low cypress tree with the other. Women! They had just been brought to the wooden barracks, given blankets, and briefed on basic rules. No shouting, no barking dogs, no drunken guards, but the hunger still burned. Her stomach tightened in waves, each breath like a blade slicing through her. 6 days without food, 6 days on nothing but water and a thin thread of desperate hope. Now that her body finally sensed relative safety, the hunger took its full shape. Raw, demanding, painful. From afar came the sound of an engine different from the military trucks. Deeper, rougher, with gravel crunching under its wheels. Helena turned instinctively. A dusty green pickup truck rolled into the camp yard. Something large lay under a canvas tarp in the back. 3 men rode in the truck, 2 in the front, 1 in the bed. Wide-brimmed leather hats, plaid shirts, worn jeans, heavy work boots caked with dirt. No insignia, no uniforms, not soldiers. They looked like the figures she'd only seen in German advertisements of the American West. Cowboys. The truck stopped near the group of prisoners. The man in the passenger seat jumped down first, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. He looked to be in his 40s, deeply suntanned, arms thick and sinewed. He lifted the tarp. Helena smelled it before she saw it. The scent of hot fried chicken, baked cornbread, melting butter, and, above all, cool, citrus fresh lemonade. The smell hit her like a slap. Under the tarp were large metal trays, oversized pots, and coolers filled with fogged-up glass bottles. Tin cups rolled around. Heat rose visibly from the food, the aroma so strong Helena's stomach spasmed again, almost painfully. The other two cowboys jumped down and began lifting crates and trays off the truck. They moved with the steady certainty of men accustomed to hard labor. They spoke quick English. Helena caught only fragments: bread, chicken, lemonade. An American officer walked over from the guard line, exchanged a few words, and shook hands with the older cowboy. Not a business handshake, but the kind men give each other when they know they're doing something right. Then the cowboy looked at the prisoners and tipped his hat, as if greeting guests. Helena froze. Guests? They were prisoners, not guests. Across the yard, soldiers dragged out long wooden tables and set them beneath the shade. Rough cloths were spread over them. Tin plates, knives, forks, and cups were arranged neatly. The entire scene felt less like a feeding of enemies and more like preparations for a picnic. Helena's legs felt nailed to the earth. Her mind spun. Every lesson drilled into her about Anglo-Saxon cruelty suddenly didn't fit. There were no whips, no filthy buckets of slop. Instead, the smell of fried chicken, cornbread, cold lemonade, and kindness. A prisoner beside her whispered, voice cracked, "They cooked for us?" Helena didn't answer. She didn't dare believe her own eyes. When the tables were set, the older cowboy stepped back, wiped sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand, and spoke to the officer. Then he turned to the women and called out, not harshly, but with patient firmness, "Food, for you. Eat." A young American soldier walked along the line, motioning them forward. No one moved. Helena felt 300 bodies around her go rigid. Her own feet, too. The smell wrapped around them like invisible smoke. This was more frightening than hunger itself. Something so good, so generous, appearing at the exact moment they were at their weakest. It terrified her more than any threat could. "Go," someone whispered behind her, nudging her forward. Helena stepped only because she feared her knees would buckle. The line inched closer to the tables. On the tables lay trays of stacked golden crisp chicken, round cornbread cakes smelling of toasted flour, a huge pot of what looked like steaming mashed potatoes, tall glass jugs of lemonade with ice shifting inside, the outer surface misted with cold, rows of tin cups. Helena stared at it as if staring at a dream meant to mock her. She heard people swallowing, tiny whimpers of hunger escaping their throats. Her pulse hammered in her neck. "Take your plate," an American soldier said, holding out a metal tray. No one reached for it. The silence grew so heavy Helena wanted to scream just to break it, but everyone stood frozen, statues trapped in fear. A young blonde prisoner in the front suddenly sobbed. Not loud, but a strangled, desperate sound. "No. No," she whispered. Helena understood, not because she wasn't hungry, but because she was too hungry, too broken, to trust that any of this was real. Behind her, another prisoner murmured, in German tangled with terror, "They might be filming, mocking us, making us eat like animals." Propaganda had taught them to expect every imaginable cruelty. There was no room left in them for trust. The older cowboy stepped forward. He looked down the line of hollow faces, his pale eyes resting on Helena's. Something in his expression made her stiffen. Not pity, but genuine confusion, as if he couldn't fathom why someone wouldn't want to eat. He turned to the officer. "They're scared to death." The officer said something back. The cowboy hesitated a beat, then did something incredibly simple. He took a plate, a spoonful of mashed potatoes, a piece of cornbread, 2 pieces of fried chicken, a cup of lemonade poured over ice. Every eye followed him as if watching a ritual. He put the plate on the edge of the table, lifted a piece of chicken, and took a large bite. Juice ran down. He chewed. He swallowed. He stayed standing. Nothing happened. Just a man eating lunch. Silence trembled. He ate a bite of cornbread, a long drink of lemonade. Then he placed the remaining chicken on the plate and pushed it toward Helena. "For you." Helena looked at the food, then at his sunburned face. The wrinkles at his eyes were carved more by smiles than scowls. No deceit, only something she couldn't bear to acknowledge. Concern for someone labeled an enemy. Her hand trembled as she reached out. Her fingertips brushed the cold metal. The smell rose: hot chicken skin, butter, cracked pepper, toasted cornmeal. Her mind screamed, "Don't! It might be poisoned. It might be a trick. It might be—" But her stomach screamed louder. The piece of chicken felt heavy in her thin hand, warm, oily. Her heart pounded so loud she could hear it. The entire camp went silent. Even the guards were still. She raised the food to her mouth, then froze. Her throat tightened. Her wrist faltered. She looked up at the cowboy, searching for one final sign. He nodded, softly. "Eat," he said, not as a command, but as gentle advice. Helena inhaled. In that moment, every year of propaganda, every slogan, every marching song, every lesson on American barbarity, every memory of bombs and death and fear spun through her mind like a burning reel of film. She thought of her brother, gone, of the hospital, of Hamburg's flames, of her mother, of the ship, and of standing now on American soil with a stranger offering her food, asking nothing in return. She bit down. The chicken cracked under her teeth, salt, heat, crisp skin, soft meat flooding her tongue. Her body reacted long before her mind did. Her stomach seized. Her eyes stung. A tiny, broken sound escaped her throat. Nothing horrible happened. Nothing but the overwhelming ache of tasting real food after 6 days of starving. And somewhere deep inside her, something snapped. Slowly, whispers spread. Then one woman reached for a plate. Another took cornbread. Another tasted lemonade, ice cold and gently tart, slipping down a throat roughened by days of hunger. The camp shifted, clinking metal, spoons scraping, gulps, soft sobbing between hurried bites. No loud talking, but the air was different. No longer terror, but something fragile, tender, gratitude still too scared to speak its name. The old cowboy stepped back, arms folded, watching with relief. He murmured to the others, "It's good, they're eating." No pride, just quiet satisfaction. Helena finished her first piece of chicken as though every fiber of it was proof that the world was more complicated than she'd been taught. She drank lemonade, coldness spreading to her chest. Her hands still trembled, not from fear, but from astonishment. She caught the cowboy's eye. He lifted a corner of his mouth and said a phrase she only partly understood, yet felt deeply. "Good, good, girls." Women around her ate, drank, some whispered clumsy thank yous. Soldiers moved among them, refilling water, passing more bread, never smug or superior. Just doing something very simple. feeding other human beings. Helena looked at her empty plate. She touched the smear of grease left behind, needing to confirm it was real. She looked around. The barbed wire was still there, the rifles, still slung across shoulders. They were still prisoners. The war still raged. But something had changed. Not in the structure of the world, but inside the hearts of the 300 women who had been raised to hate. In that moment, if someone had asked her what had just happened, Helena wouldn't have found the words. Years later, when time had softened the memories of war, she would remember the tremor in her hand as she lifted that first bite, the cowboy's eyes, the taste of lemon and salt, the hunger dissolving, and understand that an invisible battle line had collapsed. He hesitated. Then she ate. The mornings in the Texas camp usually began with the smell of early sunlight, the kind that wasn't harsh, just warm enough to heat the wooden walls of the barracks and wake the small birds perched on the tin roofs. Helena sat on her bed, the thin blanket pulled up to her waist. She had been sleeping better for the past few weeks, but the strangeness remained. Being treated like a human being after having braced herself to become the victim of unspeakable things. On her knees lay a sheet of white paper she'd been given the night before. She had stared at it for a long time without daring to write. Now, her hand still trembled as she held the short pencil. A light breeze blew through the open window, making the page quiver like the hesitation inside her. She wrote the first line in German. "Dear Mother, I am still alive." The second line flowed more easily. "Don't worry about me." But on the third line, the pencil stopped. The words piled up in her throat, colliding with everything she had believed until now. "We are being treated kindly." She paused. Her handwriting turned shaky, smudging slightly, partly because her hand was weak, partly because of an old, familiar fear. Fear of saying something that contradicted propaganda. Fear of being branded a traitor. Fear that the letter would never reach her mother. She erased the sentence with the worn eraser carefully until only a faint gray shadow remained. She tried again. "They give us enough to eat." She erased it again. It felt like being a schoolgirl doing something wrong under the watchful eye of a strict teacher, just waiting for her to slip and reveal a wrong thought about the enemy. Helena sighed and wrote a third time. "Mother, I think what we were taught is not true." Then she put the pencil down and stared at the words, her heart pounding as if someone were knocking against her ribs from the inside. This time, she didn't erase it. For the first time, she let the sentence exist. At noon, Helena went to the inner yard to wash some clothes. A figure standing near the shade of a tree caught her eye, the young guard who had given his seat to an elderly POW on that first day. He was holding a cigarette but not smoking it, just rolling it between his fingers. When he noticed Helena looking, he gave a slight nod. She bowed, her head in return, awkward. "Hello," she managed in English. He smiled. "Hello, ma'am." His voice was gentle, not the forced politeness of someone trying to prove he was kind, but the natural tone of someone raised to speak that way. After a few seconds of silence, he asked, "You okay here?" She understood the question thanks to the English lessons they had been given. "Okay." "Yes," she answered, though she still wasn't sure what "okay" really meant in the middle of a war. He sat down on the wooden step and gestured to the empty spot beside him. Helena hesitated, then sat. They remained silent for a while, listening to insects and the wind hitting the roof. Finally, he spoke, his tone steady, as if repeating something he'd carried his whole life. "My father fought in France in the Great War." Helena turned to him. "He said, The guard paused, then went on, voice softer. If he ever saw an enemy wounded, he'd be kind to him. Because the war isn't the soldier's fault. Helena swallowed. The words felt like a key turning in a lock she'd been afraid to touch. A world where compassion wasn't weakness, but the very thing that separated human beings from machines and slogans. She heard herself asking a question she didn't know she had inside her. Why kind to us? He looked at her without hesitation. Because someone has to stop the hate somewhere. Those words cut deeper into Helena than any lecture ever had. No grand speech, no philosophy. They were simply true. That afternoon, a scream echoed from Barracks 3. Helena and several other POWs ran at once. An older woman, the one who had stood near Helena in line when they first arrived, was clutching her stomach, face ashen, coughing so hard it looked as if she might collapse. American medics arrived quickly. 2 nurses and a doctor rushed in with medical bags and equipment. Their English was too fast for Helena to understand, but their actions were unmistakable. Gently lifting the woman, checking her pulse, placing a warm cloth on her forehead, starting fluids. No annoyance, no contempt, only the urgency of people accustomed to caring for the sick. One nurse signaled that she needed someone to translate. Helena stepped forward, heart racing. She knelt beside the bed and repeated simple questions in German. Where does it hurt? Is it hard to breathe? Are you dizzy? The woman tried to answer, and Helena relayed her words to the doctor. The cooperation felt strange. 2 sides of a war working together to keep one woman alive. The American doctor looked at Helena and said, his voice a little rough, "You help very well." She bowed her head, shame and pride mixing inside her. Pride at being useful, shame at having once believed Americans had no humanity. When the woman stabilized, Helena stepped back. Her hands smelled of disinfectant, sweat, and American soap, a combination of scents unfamiliar yet, strangely, reassuring. By late afternoon, when the sun was resting on the treetops, Helena received a reply from Germany. A guard called her name and handed her a thin brown envelope. She opened it with trembling hands. The first line, in her mother's handwriting, blurred her vision at once. "Helena, my daughter, I pray every day that you are safe." She swallowed a sob, then read on. "Knowing that you are being treated kindly eases my heart. War makes people forget that they are human to one another. If where you are shows you the opposite, then believe what you see." Helena brought a hand to her mouth. Tears fell onto the page, soaking into the ink. Her mother wasn't angry. She didn't call her a traitor for saying the Americans were kind. She even told Helena to trust her own experience. That melted something inside her, something hard as stone and sharp as a blade that had lived in her heart for 4 years under the weight of propaganda. She folded the letter, pressed it to her chest, and cried. Not the heavy, desperate tears of hunger or terror, but the tears of someone realizing she was still capable of believing in goodness. Night fell. Helena sat by the dormitory window. Texas moonlight spread thinly across the camp yard. The watchtower shadows stretched long but no longer felt threatening. Guards walked their routes, steps light, not shining flashlights into the barracks like in the stories she'd once heard. Helena leaned her head against the wall and replayed the day, the meal with the Cowboys, the cold lemonade, the conversation with the young guard, the collapsed woman, the doctor's hand on a frail wrist, her mother's letter. After a while, she realized that in her mind, only faint echoes of old propaganda remained. They were no longer solid, no longer absolute truth she was bound to follow. They were like rotting planks soaked through with water, splitting along hidden seams. She had once believed Americans were inhuman, but they had cared for her like a granddaughter. She had believed the enemy was always cruel. But the young soldier spoke of his father with quiet reverence. She had believed a prison camp could only be hell. But here there were soft laughs, small, cautious, from women reclaiming a little hope. No bomb had ever shaken her faith in Nazi Germany, but kindness was dismantling it piece by piece. Helena placed a hand over her chest and felt her breathing ease, growing less ragged. She understood then. The greatest change wasn't happening in any country or on any front line. It was happening inside her own heart. And when she lifted her eyes to the night sky, she knew the words she had written in her letter were truer than anything she had ever been taught. Truth doesn't arrive on the sound of gunfire. It comes in the shape of human kindness. Texas mornings opened with a honeygold light slipping through the low cypress branches surrounding the camp. Thin dew clung to the ground, but the dry heat of this land was already beginning to rise early. Helena stepped into the inner yard with the other POWs, where they were assigned to light labor, not forced work but part of the camp's daily rhythm. Fixing a broken chicken coop, turning soil in the vegetable garden, repairing an old section of fence. As they received their tools, Helena noticed a group of American soldiers carrying hammers, shovels, and rolls of new wire. A young soldier she had met on the truck that first day nodded at her. Helena returned the nod, a little shy but no longer afraid as before. That day, they had to repair a section of fence blown down by the storm the night before. On one side, American soldiers raised the posts. On the other, POWs held the rails steady. The work was heavy but not difficult, and no one shouted. There were no whips, no barking orders, only the sound of hammers striking wood, metal clinking sharply, and fragmented conversations paced by breath. A red-haired American soldier leaned on his hammer and asked in a thick Texas drawl, "You all ever worked on a farm?" One POW behind them let out a soft laugh and answered in clumsy English, "Chicken, yes. Fence, no." Everyone chuckled, the kind of strange, quiet laughter that felt like they had just stepped across an invisible line between enemy and acquaintance. Helena stood near the young soldier, helping him lift a sheet of wire. "So, you were a nurse?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, Luftwaffe." He smiled without a hint of mockery. "My sister's a nurse. Hardest job in the world." She couldn't tell if he was being polite or sincere, but there was no deceit in his expression. They worked side by side, sometimes awkward in their attempts to understand one another, but even the awkwardness felt gentler than the fear that had clung to Helena for months. When the chicken coop was finally rebuilt, a white hen suddenly burst out of the enclosure, making several POWs jump back. An American soldier ran after it, slipped, and fell flat onto the red dust. The POWs nearby burst into laughter, real, crisp, unconstrained. The soldier lay there laughing along with them. When he looked up, his eyes met Helena's. For the first time since her capture, Helena smiled. That afternoon, when everyone was dismissed for rest, Helena went to the small medical station of the camp, a wooden room with 3 beds, a treatment table, a few cabinets of supplies, and the familiar scent of clean bandages. She often helped the American nurse tidy up whenever she had free time. The simple work gave her a sense of usefulness. As she was folding rolls of gauze, the door swung open. The young soldier from the morning walked in, holding his right wrist with his left hand. A sharp wire had cut his skin while he and the POWs repaired the fence. He winced, but didn't groan. The American nurse was busy in the back, so she called Helena to assist. Helena gestured for him to sit on the bed. The eating scent of sun, sweat, and Texas dust lingered on him. She opened the medical kit and took out antiseptic. I do it," she said in imperfect English. He extended his arm without hesitation, trusting her. Blood seeped from the cut across his wrist, dark red. Helena gently took his hand and cleaned the wound. He inhaled softly, not from pain but from the cold sting of the antiseptic. "War's gonna end someday," he said, looking out the window. People stay." The simple words froze Helena in place. She bandaged him in silence, but the sentence kept circling in her mind. Wars end. People remain. When she tied the final knot, he lifted his hand, tested it, and smiled. "Thank you, ma'am." "Good as new." Helena bowed her head, warmth blooming strangely in her chest. That evening, the camp held an outdoor movie screening, something Helena never imagined could happen in an American prison camp. A white sheet was stretched between posts in the yard. A hand-cranked projector rattled from behind them. POWs sat on long wooden benches. Guards stood scattered around without tension. The administration said it was to maintain humanitarian spirit. The film was an old American comedy. Characters stumbling, running, crashing into things in scenes Helena had never seen anywhere but picture books. Laughter burst from all directions. Women who had trembled under the weight of war's worst horrors now laughed like schoolgirls at a fairground. One particularly ridiculous scene made the entire row erupt. Helena felt laughter suddenly break out of her chest before she could stop it. A real laugh, unforced, unafraid. For that moment, she didn't feel like she was inside an enemy POW camp. She felt like she was part of a world she once believed could never exist. The next day, dust rose again on the road. The familiar green pickup truck of the Cowboys rolled into the camp. Helena and many POWs working in the garden recognized the engine instantly. The old cowboy jumped down first. His face was sun-browned, deep lines clustering around his eyes, but those eyes were bright and warm. He carried a basket of hot cornbread. The younger cowboy brought 2 large jars of honey and farm milk. A POW whispered, "They're here again." Her voice was both surprised and delighted. The old cowboy grinned wide. "Got something for you, girls?" Helena stepped forward. He recognized her immediately and nodded like greeting an old friend. "You're eating better now?" he asked. She nodded a little too quickly. "Yes, much better," she replied in carefully practiced English. He chuckled warmly. "Good. You were shaky like a scared fawn that day." Helena flushed. She remembered that first moment he handed her the meat. It felt like a memory from another lifetime. They talked a moment, short but enough to erase the last traces of distance that had once stood between them. The Cowboys handed out cornbread, poured milk into tin cups, and showed the POWs how to mix cornmeal for baking. Small things, ordinary things, but to Helena they were pieces of a world she had never been allowed to touch. Before leaving, the old cowboy tipped his hat. "Take care, girls, we'll be back." And the truck rolled away again, leaving a cloud of dust suspended in the afternoon sun. That night, the room where Helena slept was lit only by the cool moonlight through the window. Some POWs already slept. Others whispered softly in the dark. Helena sat with her back against the wall, knees drawn up, a strange peace settling in her chest. A woman across from her murmured, "Helena." They were too kind again today. Someone else responded, hesitating, "I didn't think Americans were like this." Silence followed, long enough that each of them seemed to be asking the same question. Then Helena said, slowly, clearly, admitting what she had hidden in her heart too long. The Americans are not what we were taught. No one disagreed. No one scoffed. Only silence. But it was the silence of truth newly spoken. Something had changed forever. Not only in Helena, but in every woman in that room. Women who, for the first time, understood that even enemies had hearts. The night drifted on with the sound of wind slipping through the barbed wire. And there, between those cold strands of steel, Helena felt the world grow wider, warmer, less frightening. Beneath the barbed wire, people still found their way to one another. That morning did not begin like any other, not because of the sunlight, not because of the wind, but because of the loudspeaker calling the names of the female POWs to assemble in the main yard. The American guard's voice rang out steadily, not rushed, but carrying a tone that felt different somehow. Helena set her bowl of porridge down, her heart tightening for no clear reason. "Transfer," one POW whispered. "I heard maybe—" "Repatriation," another said, her voice caught between hope and fear. Helena stood up and moved into line. Over the past months, she had grown used to the rhythm of this place. Morning work, English lessons, hesitant conversations with American guards, the Cowboys' visits, quiet evenings under the moon. But today, all of that felt as if it were slipping through her fingers. The American officer stepped in front of the assembled prisoners. He held a list and read down the lines. "Many of you will be moved to another camp, closer to prepare for repatriation." A soft hiss of breath passed through the ranks of POWs like wind seeping under a door. Tension, joy, confusion. Every emotion bled together across their faces. Then Helena heard her own name. Her whole body seemed to drop out from under her, not from fear, but from a sense of loss she didn't know how to name. The thought of leaving this place, leaving the people who had helped her become human again, leaving those she had once called the enemy, and now felt closer to than most of her own countrymen. That thought made her chest clench painfully. That afternoon, the camp prepared a surprise dinner. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. This was the last meal before many of them would leave. The Cowboys returned in the familiar green pickup, bringing trays of freshly baked cornbread, jars of homemade preserves, and slabs of smoking grilled meat. The smell of wood smoke rose, blending with the scent of meat, roasted corn, and the heavy Texas heat, creating an aroma that made Helena freeze in the middle of the yard. The smell of something peaceful, something she was about to lose. The old cowboy climbed down, cheeks flushed from the sun. He hefted a big basket of cornbread. When he saw Helena, he let out a small laugh. "Well, look who's still here." She smiled, too, even as something inside her was quietly breaking. "Yes, still here," she replied. They set the tables under the trees. American guards brought out chairs, no longer keeping the distance they had on that first day. Some POWs helped pour lemonade and set out plates. No orders barked, no one told exactly what to do. Things were simply done, as if this were a small village sharing an evening meal. When everything was ready, they sat down. Helena looked around, faces that had once been gaunt with terror and hunger, faces that had flinched at every loud sound. Now they were smiling, genuinely. A few American guards sat at a nearby table speaking softly with the POWs like neighbors sharing a summer evening. Helena ate a piece of cornbread, butter melting across her tongue. Another bite, a bit of grilled meat, cold lemonade. All those flavors blended with the warmth in her chest, not because the food was better than in Germany, but because of who had brought it to her. When the meal was finished, the old cowboy stood, looked around the tables, and said in his slow, slightly raspy voice, "We figured. You girls should have one more good meal before the trip." No one answered, but gratitude shone plain in every pair of eyes. As the evening wound down, the young soldier came over and handed Helena a small canvas bag. Inside were a few cookies, some clean bandages, and a light blue handkerchief. "For you to use on the way," he said. Helena took the bag, her throat tightening. "Thank you," she whispered. The old cowboy walked over, adjusted his hat, then leaned forward slightly. "Take care, Helena." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her throat felt gripped in a vice. She wanted to tell him she would miss him, that he had saved her more than he could ever know, that he had given her something Nazi Germany never had, faith in human kindness. But no sound would form. He only smiled, eyes warm. "You'll be all right." The next morning, military trucks stood waiting at the camp gate. POWs lined up, ready to depart. Helena clutched the canvas bag, a sharp ache in her chest. The guards she had grown used to stood along the sides for the first time, not wearing their usual neutral masks. Many of them smiled, offering quiet goodbyes. As Helena climbed onto the truck, she turned back. Everything in front of her seemed to slow like a film running in half speed. The bathhouse where she had cried for the first time under warm water. The yard where she had repaired fences alongside American soldiers. The classroom where the teacher had taught her the word dignity. The flagpole square where they watched movies. The old cypress where she'd listened to the cowboy tell stories. And farther off, the dirt road where that green pickup so often appeared. All of those places had returned to her the humanity war had swallowed. Helena placed her hand on the side of the truck, feeling the hot metal under her palm. She wanted to memorize it all, not because she feared forgetting, but because she knew from this moment on, her life would forever be divided into two parts, before Texas and after Texas. The engine roared to life. The gate swung open. The tires crunched over gravel, then rolled forward slowly. Through the small window, Helena saw the old cowboy standing in the shade of a tree, hand raised in a small farewell. A young guard smiled and tipped his cap. A few POWs left behind waved, wishing them luck. In that moment, everything she had ever learned about war, hatred, fear, brutality, dissolved like morning mist in the Texas sun.